So far in this podcast series, we've looked at the possibilities that arise when we imagine a world in which the essay no longer exists as the default reporting structure in the academy. We've established an allegorical framework for such a vision in Act 1. We have seen what students can do when freed from the burdens of the essay in Act 2. And we have in Act 3 traced the history, rather whimsically I admit, of the terminal kind of theory that leads to dead ends and the broadening kind of theory that leads to possibility. Yet, as Duke Ellington used to say, it don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing.
Oh, it don't mean a thing if you ain't got that swing.
In the case at hand, the swing is assessment and the attitude we take toward it. Why do we have to talk about assessment when we talk about writing in a mediated environment? Well, it's simple, because we have to be able to demonstrate from the first that the kind of work we're talking about in this series is subject to accountability measures. We must be able to demonstrate that writing in a mediated environment is in the tradition of modern post-secondary educational environment, launched, let's say, in 1869 by Charles Elliot, that's him in the upper left-hand corner, when he became president of Harvard. With John Dewey, directly below him is his picture, we must embrace the kind of pragmatism that results in careful attention to context and contingency. With Henry Chauncey, the upper right-hand corner, I'm writing his biography now, the founding president of the world's greatest nonprofit educational assessment institution, the Educational Testing Service, we must be able to relish what assessment can mean for the individual. And with Fred Gottschalk, shown there in the bottom right, in 1966 he demonstrated to the world that writing could be assessed directly without the need for limited response questions. With Gottschalk, we must be willing to turn assessment strategies on their heads. Indeed, the figures on this page are doing just that. Each is finding new ways to award gold stars, to examine the strategies associated with writing achievement. In the postmodern world, however, who gets to award the stars and what these stars mean are matters that are constantly shifting. Ed White, Brian Hewitt, Bob Broad, Patricia Lynn are all willing to raise new questions and pose new solutions. The two on the left, White and Hewitt, are synoptic. They view writing assessment as an activity that is informed by an empirical tradition of measurement, one that combines the methods of science with the humility of humanism. The two on the right, however, are agnostic. Bob Broad has conceptualized a new assessment method designed to problematize the most complex aspects of evaluation and fully examine those areas. His system, dynamic criteria mapping, holds great promise as a new strategy that will reveal much about the complex variables of writing assessment. Taking an extreme position, Patricia Lynn, shown on the right bottom of the screen, believes that writing assessment has been compromised by a narrowly conceived empirical tradition, and that the way forward must embrace, as Lynn states, meaningful relationships among participants, their writing products, and the purposes of the assessment. Ready to turn her guns on the Winter Palace, Lynn stands ready to embrace separatism and even reject the terms reliability and validity themselves. While her view is controversial, every group needs an Emma Goldman, just to keep it honest. So what to do? Should we follow Kant and act only according to that maxim by which you can at the same time will that should become a universal law? Should we follow John Rawls's theory of justice and believe that the principles of a just society will be those principles chosen by free and rational persons meeting together in an original position at the start of their association? Should we encourage shareholders to make decisions behind a veil of ignorance in which no one knows about place in society and hence can become student or reader or policymaker in any given moment? What to do? We must begin in developing our attitude toward assessment, embrace a more robust concept of validity itself. And there's no better place to begin than with Samuel Messick. In 1989, he offered a comprehensive definition of validity as an integrated, evaluated judgment that will, if followed, serve us well today. His famous diagram on the right-hand side of the screen represents the iterative relationships that exist between construct validity, relevance, value implications, and social consequences. Believing that test interpretation and test use are to be seen as interactive elements, Messick imagined the challenging next steps towards improved testing practices. Those steps, those challenges, are being met today. In 2005, the Handbook of Writing Research, edited by Charles McArthur, Steve Graham, and Jill Fitzgerald, these authors bring together, from an essentially cognitive perspective, a summary of theories, applications, instructional, and analytic models. Charles Bazeman's 2007 Handbook on Research on Writing, History, Society, School, Individual Text, is really derived from a composition perspective. The chapter on construct and consequence, validity, and writing assessment is written in the Messick tradition. It's written in the pursuit of different ways to warrant validity. And at the center remains the American Educational Research Association, American Psychological Association, and National Council on Measurement in Education Standards for Educational and Psychological Testing, the 1999 edition. While noting that many assessment programs, such as those employing standard and electronic portfolios, enlarge the scope of measurement error, we might agree with the committee members when they state in the standards and recognize that some of the resultant sacrifices in reliability may reduce construct irrelevance or construct underrepresentation in an assessment program. And thus, these three books taken together help to establish the context for contemporary writing assessment practice. In 2005 and in subsequent work, I advanced the idea of bricolage as an appropriate metaphor for assessing writing, especially in a mediated environment. Claude Lévi-Strauss, who in 1966 celebrated small-scale investigations conducted within specific contexts in the savage mind, of course, first advanced this idea. Nowhere is the spirit of that celebration clearer than in his description of epistemology of a bricoleur, the jack of all trades, whose methods produce bricolage, representations that are appropriate to context-rich, complex situations. Lévi-Strauss was quite sensitive to the division and relations between two ways of knowing. The bricoleur is adept at performing a number of diverse tasks, but unlike the engineer, he does not subordinate each of them to the availability of raw materials and tools conceived and procedures for the purpose of the project. Lévi-Strauss's relationship with the linguist Roman Jakobson led to his belief that there are central aspects of communication, senders and receivers, and share codes that are best understood only, I'll stress the word only again, within specific circumstances. The more we can know about the particularities of the signifiers and the ideas they signify, he believed, the better. The work my colleagues and I have been doing since 1996 at NJIT is based on the achievement of the validation goals of environmental validity, content validity, associative validity, consequential validity, and of course, reader reliability. Such an emphasis led to sustainable methods of writing assessment in which no student is ever judged in isolation, but rather evaluated as part of a program. Current work undertaken with the sponsorship of the Council for Programs in Technical and Scientific Communication is part of this shown assessment framework. Recent work in the assessment of information literacy, initiated by Davida Scharf and her colleagues at the Van Houten Library here at NJIT, has led to research collaboration with Irv Katz and his ETS colleagues regarding their innovative iSkills information and communication technology literary test. Well, we've thus been able to assess writing in many forms, both traditionally print-based writing and writing in a computer-mediated environment. Adhering to Messick's call for a unified validity framework, we have been able to bring many kinds of evidence to warrant our work. Complex submissions of student work are read with acceptable levels of reliability by our assessment community. And we have been able to relate our writing scores to other criteria of student performance, such as scores on standardized tests and grade point average. In our decade worth of assessment work, we have found with George Uswood and Wanji Chikukas that our quantitative community has developed around an assumption of mutual responsibility, an acknowledgement of interconnectedness, and a commitment to integrity that's developed around a common purpose. We have also found, of course, that the answers are not behind us, but many of them remain in front of us. As writing continues to be shaped in a mediated environment, we need to be continuously willing to transform our definitions and the assumptions they imply. What traditions, we may ask, will best support our future assessment efforts? From print traditions, for example, we might have a look at such statements designed by the Conference on College Composition and Communication. Their 1995 position statement on writing continues to serve as a basic framework to ensure that consequential validity issues will be served. That statement is well supplemented and extended by the 2004 CCCC position statement on teaching, writing, learning, and assessing writing in a digital environment. From the usability tradition, our work should be informed, for example, by the work of Janice Reddish, as we begin to think about the variables involved in assessing writing for the web. From the tradition of visual design, textbooks in this case, such as those by Evans and Thomas, will provide a basic framework for the conceptualization of the primary principles, support principles, and elements of visual design. From the aesthetic tradition, we would always do well to recall the philosophical framework that we have inherited concerning the construction of beauty. And as noted earlier in this series, we would do well to recall the work of John Dewey. In this context, I would again strongly recommend a rereading of his 1934 lectures, Art as Experience. And for interpretive work between the modes, we could do no better than follow the online journal Kairos. That journal's ever-inspiring way always provides perspective for us. Such new traditions are important to us. Why? Because assessment is never, ever going to go away, nor should it. The current system of assessment that we have inherited in contemporary education is one that has gotten out of control because it no longer keeps up with what we know is true about the very knowledge we create. The preservation of democracy requires citizens capable of complex cognitive and affective processes, and unless we make sure that our assessment programs both capture and promote such necessary complexity, our systems will fail us as surely as the essay has failed our students.